Tonight's guest speaker, Campion Platt, who expressed an interest in sharing some of his experience with the design students here at the Academy. And although we don't officially have an interior design program here, our program is mostly focused on furniture design. The things that we make as furniture designers often get specified by interior designers. And so I thought it would be a great opportunity for us to learn more about how interior designers think and how what they do is relevant to what we do. So basically I thought it was a unique chance for us to get educated about interior design, and Mr. Platt has been generous enough to come and share some of his process with us tonight. Campion Platt is a world-renowned interior designer and architect based in New York who uses a holistic approach to design that creates highly personalized spaces and homes for his clients. He's the author of the book Made to Order and has received numerous accolades for his work, such as distinguished rankings on Architectural Digest's AD 100 list of the world's top interior designers, as well as on New York Magazine's list of the city's 100 best architects and decorators. We really appreciate him taking the time and effort to visit us and share his ideas, so please help me welcome Campion Platt.
I'm going to switch to a mic in a second. I have to get this thing tuned up again. It went dead. There we go. So good evening. I'm going to turn this on and walk around and try not to blow your ears out. So first you should know that this is a bit of a homecoming. I've been back a few times. I have an old class of mine, Kim Dent, in the audience, who we're doing some work with here locally. I'm doing a house currently in Bloomfield Hills, and I went to U of M before some of you in the middle rows were born. But I'm happy to be back and to share a little bit about what I'm about. I've been in New York. I left University of Michigan, went to Columbia University, took a master's in architecture, then apprenticed with Architectonica, firm out of Miami, for a few years in New York, and started my own practice about 27 years ago. Since then, I've been a developer. I've kind of gone back to that in some ways in recent years. An architect, an interior designer, a collaborator with other architects and interior designers, and a furniture maker. And so today, we'll talk mostly about the furniture, and I'll pepper it with some kind of background of the projects and the kind of things we were involved with to develop these certain pieces of furniture. I think this slide format, let me just check and see if I can get cut off here maybe. We'll make the best of it. I'll see if it's bad for the other ones. So I wanted to start with this. In 2002, I'd already been practicing for some time, and I was very interested in making my own collection. And I'll show you some of the other licensing products that we've done along with that, but I wanted to do something that wasn't either client-based in a project or driven by commerce in some way. And at the same time, I had met this gentleman who had just done an exhibition at the Katona Museum, Nicholas Brower, and he had done this book, which was about British campaign furniture. I had always been interested in this kind of furniture, the metamorphic quality, the way it was crafted, the reason for its being. And so in historic times, it was used primarily in wars, unfortunately, but it took, when you had 2,500 officers fighting a war, you had 5,000 attendants who were cooking and cleaning and carrying furniture for these guys who were fighting the wars. This is an image of a palanquin from historic times. Sorry. This is one of the images from Nicholas's book, and it's really emblematic of the time. And I mean, these guys were going all over the world in these war campaigns, and they had the fans going in the background, and great meals and wonderful furniture. So you probably know the Rourke campaign chair is probably one of the emblematic pieces of this period, which was folded up on the left-hand side and was actually the precursor to the Basili chair by Breuer. So in England at the time, in Catherine Street, was a little furniture making places where they made all this furniture. It became so popular as a style of the time, different from the other maybe more classical ones of the time, that people started using it in their homes in England. And so with that kind of background, I began to develop an idea about how I could use this old design style in a new way in a city like New York. So I did the collection and then found a place to place it all. An old friend of mine, Jay McInerney, who you may know, was a writer in New York. He wrote Bright Lights, Big City, kind of a big book in the late 80s. And you can see this was done a few years ago because I have more gray hair now. So he had a small apartment. He just moved into the West Village and he loved that area. And I said, okay, I want to do this apartment with you. We're going to use every single piece of furniture in the collection and find a way and purpose for it in your house. So this was the collection. I'll just review a few of the pieces with you. It was, I guess, 20 pieces. And some of them are metamorphic, meaning they fold and move into one thing or another, and some of them don't. So we have some historical examples of the kind of things that we're talking about historically with the furniture that would fold to a table on the left-hand side. And we had a whole series of kind of wonderful names around the ones we developed. So you can see that chair on the left and the black stool, let me see if I can point and hold three things at once here. Right, so this chair here with this table is the folded piece, actually just in a different finish, and these two fold together and fold down to become a hippodrome with a table, so an ottoman. So you have two club chairs, and a side table will become an ottoman in an apartment. This was particularly effective in Jay's apartment because if any of you know anything about him, he loves wine. He's actually quite an oenophile, and he writes for magazines and has great parties where he celebrates the wine and cooking, and he has more people than he can actually fit in his apartment, so he has to fold up a lot of the furniture to put away to have the party. So another example here is a bench that you saw in the fireplace earlier that folds up into a cube on the right. Again, that image, and this is the case of a palanquin table, which is a sideboard in this case, which if you slide the top forward and then fold it over, it became a dining table. This was kind of a direct takeoff on this particular piece. I just love the kind of metalwork that was made, and we had this all tooled in Brooklyn from a fabricator who I do a lot of work with. All this stuff has been transported through a series of different apartments, some of his apartments and then some of mine, and then some to storage. And in each case, we find a little small box to pack it away in. But in historic England, you would have had a box to package all these items in as well. This is it in the apartment. And here you have a view of the apartment. So there's a Napoleon and Josephine in the back. That's the cube bench. This was on the table we had made. This is called Sleeping Hero, which is a fold-up day bed. So there's two little nuts down here that unscrew. The mattress comes out and the two sides fold in and you can put it away in a closet. He had to do that a few times when the party was too big. Some bedside tables, which have a little bookshelf, and so the upper version here is when it's closed with a metal back and a light inside, and then opened up to reveal the books. This was actually the beginning of this project, the rent table. In Old English times, the serfs from the kings would go out into the landscape and carry this little box, set it up in the grass, and collect rent from the farmers, ergo the rent table. My version looks a little bit like pool cues on the left, where we had these hand-tooled and spun out of a single steel rod, so there was a lot of grinding down, and those fold nicely underneath the table. It folds over, and there's a little handle, and you can carry it around. This one's a little bit heavy to carry, though. And you can see that along with the stacking boxes, and there's another little bench, the fold-up bench at the end of the bed. There's the palanquin table sitting on the side of the room. It gets pulled out into the middle of the gallery to become the dining room. Oh, I'm sorry. So I moved on to some other projects where I wanted to, in many cases, create a suite of furniture around an idea. We worked with Architectural Digest, and the Time Warner Towers on 57th in the corner of the park had just been built, and Digest was going to do their one and only ever show house. Most of the magazines are involved in show houses all the time in New York City and other locations. Digest had never done one, so they invited 20 designers to participate, and this is more kind of conceptual about a client. The campaign collection was more just conceptual about retooling a historic idea. This was a lot more about envisioning the kind of person who would live in this building, which cost at that time $2 billion. It was the most expensive building in New York City. There's more expensive ones now, but it still remains an iconic building, an apartment building. It actually has a Whole Foods in the basement that is the highest grossing Whole Foods in the whole world. It grosses $2 million a day on the weekends. So it has a lot of tenants, the Mandarin Hotels and one of the other towers. And so our concept here was we had kind of a smallish room, but I envisioned this kind of slick, kind of New York executive, single bachelor guy who would use this kind of as an office lounge. And so thinking about that and the furniture and the finishes and everything we used in the room, we set about designing the pieces. Still going the wrong way. Bingo. So when we finished the project, it was all featured in Digest a few months later, showing all the different designers. This is not. There we go. So we have a series of tables here, and I was able to kind of go through our archives and find some original sketches, because that's what we do, but I haven't been posed as Scott wanted me to do, to create the historical background to the pieces of furniture. So we were thinking about kind of materials that you find in New York City, and so this is actually a steel pipe that you'd find kind of in a building or in the ground, actually cut directly from the laser cut from the pipe itself with a Celeste blue marble top on it. And of course, we try and name the chairs and name the elements to kind of get the feeling of what it is. This was a taller kind of club chair in a modern way where it wraps you all the way above your ears and encloses you in the room. A club chair, the sapphire sofa in this case, and so we picked this very kind of tight blue, we walked in the room and looked out at the landscape, and we could see the Empire State Building and the other buildings and the kind of steely blue texture of what it's like to be up in a skyrise in New York City, and picked the idea of the fabric, the finishes of the woods, all to be reflective and shimmering like the city was. Some of these were a little bit of an exercise in kind of metalwork itself. These are all individual steel tubes that were just kind of bent into a shape and attached to the disc at the bottom and the top with a floating shade. So you see it there with the other pieces. And we had a desk that we were going to put at the window's edge, and so it really had to look like it was a piece of glass that was coming from another building. some blue glass building that was across the way, and the stool that went along with it. So here you can see on the right the executive, I mean the left-hand side, the little blotter, and the executive's attaché, really kind of filled it as if he'd just come back from a meeting. He had his Financial Times there with him, or a New York Observer in this case, I guess. Very New York, very kind of chic character. So that was a suite of that furniture for that collection. Before, and that's the room after. So you see the light quality, it looks, you know, the light and the tonal qualities inside and outside are matching in there. We actually, and so for the architecture of the room, we've got just the window mullions on the outside, but then inside the room we did a texturized Venetian plaster ribbed wall, and those vertical elements here are all done in steel. So it felt a little bit like a library, but in a very kind of modern way where you didn't have the wood paneling, was all done in steel. This was a fun project about 2 years ago. So there was some news that the most expensive apartment had been bought by a Russian oligarch. It was Sandy Weil, who used to run American Express apartment at 150 Central Park West, overlooking the park. That was the penthouse. 7,000 square feet, and this grain oligarch from Russia bought it for $88 million. At that time was the most expensive apartment. So I got a call from Geneva from his rep there and said, first you have to sign a non-disclosure, can't tell who you're working for. And I said, fine. He wouldn't tell me who I was working for. I can say now. And so I immediately Googled and I found the guy in like 2 seconds. So he's getting divorced from his wife. She wants $12 billion. The apartment is for him and his daughter, 22 years old, is going to NYU. And so I asked the rabbi, I said, well, who's the client? He said, well, I don't know. Who's going to be there? Maybe he'll be there, maybe she'll be there. And he said, just, you have to do a sketch. So we called this euphemistically in our office our $4 million sketch, because this was the only thing we were going to be able to give to the client. So I said, well, I can't just give him that. I have to give him a sense of the kind of individual custom quality, because money's not the object here. They were going to tear apart the apartment. He wanted it done by Thanksgiving. It was going to be a $20 million project. So I said, well, this is a conceptual sketch. You can kind of see the buildings of New York through the window on the left. You're looking kind of southeast out of the main room. There was a fireplace, and we did this whole suite of furniture and set up the room as kind of a salon. But on top of that, we did individual sketches for every single piece of furniture in the room to be custom furniture, so that he didn't, so that he wouldn't have bought anything from any store. It would all be custom. And then we kind of redid the sketch a little bit more and colorized it. We didn't get the project. The divorce continues, and the apartment's contested. Nothing's happened there since. It sits empty. This was another project. So in our practice, and I have my book here if anybody wants to look at it, and you're actually welcome to buy it afterwards as well. But in it, there's about 18 projects. Each of one is different, and it's different because every client is different. So there's kind of a conceptual framework that we bring to the projects in behind what the requirement is from the client. This was a client I'd already done a duplex for in New York early in the 90s, and they bought this incredible land. You can see through the windows there the hump of a mountain that's looking over towards West Point up in the Hudson, off the Hudson River. They bought 125 acres, the kind of the largest property that was still within 1 hour's driving distance of New York that hadn't been bought up, and set about recreating a world from 1907. So that was our starting point. That was the jumping off point. It was a historical house. We first talked about renovating the existing house, and then we ended up building a brand new house in a field, which he had to clear a bunch of trees, and once he cleared the trees, he could hear a noise from the highway, and then he had to spend 6 months building a berm so he could lose the noise from the highway but still have the field. So it was a long project. And so in this, we created a suite of what we call the Americana collection. So we really thought about And we talked to local fabricators. I like to use artisans and craftspeople who were local to the area. I have some people who work for me up in Philmont, New York, about an hour's north, and also Hudson, New York. And we created this suite of furniture with all the woods that you would have used in 1907. And any piece of furniture that we bought that we didn't make for the house was from that time period, basically 1880 to 1910. The husband, in particular, didn't want to buy any antique furniture that was upholstered because he didn't like the structure and the springs, so he wanted all the furniture to be new, which was great for us. So we bought a lot of beautiful antiques around the suite of furniture that we developed. Some of the lighting we created. And so some of the individual furniture here. So in some of these cases, we're trying to take an idea which was somewhat historic. You would have chests that used to have flip tops you'd store blankets in historically. So we still had the opening inside, but we cut a hole through it so you could see through it, and it immediately took on a kind of more modern context. Also, the studding that we used around the outside was much thicker, so it changed the whole kind of graphic scale. We made the dining chairs there as well, and the dining table and the rug. The dining room was an amazing room because they didn't want any curtains. They just wanted to have that western light streaming in. So the process of this, again, through a local vendor. And there's the room. You can see that light coming in through the room. So we made the table to go along with that, and then the rug that it sits under, we took the 5 zodiac signs of the family members, husband and wife, and their 3 children, and created kind of zones on this custom carpet that went around the room, so they had it as a real talking piece. And I think I bring that up because bringing the personal beyond, your own talent that you bring to a project is so important to make it people's own. Most of the custom pieces we make don't cost any more than you would go to a place like Baker or Holly Hunt, New York, to buy. We can usually make them in less time. But for the discerning client, and in particular now when anyone has the same information about all the furniture that there is to have on the planet, to have something custom made, personal to yourself, becomes that much more important. A sleeper sofa, and so this was published in Digest. This image was not, but it's actually my favorite room. It's a kind of a second floor study room for the kids. It's a little mature for them, but they've grown into it. But at the window wall, you can see some old carols and desks, and we actually bought those. Those were circa 1906, and they were study carols from an old school. So this was actually the pivotal piece for the entire project, and it was the hardest one to get to, and not that expensive to make, but it took me so long to convince the client to actually make the flag chair. And I said, well, this is emblematic of everything we're trying to do. It's a sense of history. They wanted to collect Americana, American art, American furniture. And the idea of kind of craft and a fun idea and making it personal was everything to me. And they finally were convinced, and they said, if we don't like them, you have to buy them back. And I said, fine. So we made a series in kind of natural finish and some painted ones. And, against the $150,000 American flag that's hanging over the table that we made, which looks like the Bear Mountain Bridge, and the $50,000 bicycle at the end, the little flag chair really holds its own as a kind of sense of a history maker and telling you where this project came from. So for us, it was a total success, and they ended up loving the chairs. Some other pieces of furnishings. This is actually in the dining room. So this is kind of what it looked like in process before, on the prow of the hill, looking down over the Hudson. Afterwards, very kind of stately, looks exactly like its period. The organization of the house from an architectural perspective was totally historical, and in this time you would have a fireplace in a hallway as a source of heat, even though they had generators and solar and everything else. It was more about creating this real sense of history. And the fixtures and the detailing were all kind of period. Those are some of the fixtures that we did for the kitchen. In the master bedroom, we had an original rosewood secretary table that we bought for the client, and so we ended up taking that kind of wood species and bringing it across the room and doing campaign pieces around that. So this is a high boy with a clock at the top and some bedside tables and the headboard, all very period, a little bit kind of masculine, and the wife was tough as well. Moving on to more of the fabric world, we've done a couple collections of, and we're working on some right now. Again, really wonderful conceptual projects for the team in our office about thinking about products. I had always liked Jim Thompson. I used to lecture about him. For any of you who don't know, he was an American who worked for the OSS and got parachuted into Malaysia the day that World War II ended. So he was like, what am I going to do? Decommissioned. He ended up walking basically to Bangkok and single-handedly resurrected the silk trade and created the Thai Silk Company, which became the largest silk company in the world. He got his real name and recognition when he went back to New York and took these really tight woven silks of bright colors to Deanna Vreeland, who was then the editor of Vogue, and she splashed them all over her pages and made a huge success of the company. It's an organically grown company. What's interesting is it's kind of eco backstory. They have a hybrid Chinese and Japanese silkworm, so one for texture, one for strength, and they married them together. The silkworms eat the mulberry bush, which is in the farming properties in northeast Thailand, and they get then the silk spun out of them, and the carcasses get ground back into the ground to become the nutrients for the mulberry tree. So it's a very organic cycle, and their factories are amazing. People riding bicycles with umbrellas, and it's fabulous. So we did a whole collection around New York. So I went. They were saying, like, "What are you going to do for us?" And I said, "Well, what you do really well is silk. You're known for silk all over the world, but I'd like to buy more from you. So what I can't buy from you is anything that's textured or three-dimensional or has a quality which you don't immediately associate with silk." So we did a series of designs for them based upon New York. So here you have the city blocks of New York, and you have these people walking and sitting in buildings, and we had some metal detailing that we found in the streets, and so everything was from the streets. We went out and photographed things in the streets that were very New York, and then manipulated them into texture and fabrics. Central Park. The concrete jungle. So can anybody guess what the image is of? Stacked radiators found on the Bowery in New York. So we did that sketch for them, and they said, "What is that?" And I said, "Well, they're actually radiators." They said, "But it makes a nice design." They had this amazing technician in Bangkok when I went over there, and he basically did strike-offs the first kind of round of the fabric, and he got about 90% of them right the first time. This one was amazing. So, like many other projects, we take all the fabrics and put them into one room. We did a room with Esquire magazine in Los Angeles a few years ago in a show house, and it showcased all the new collection there. A few years ago, we did this collection with HBF Textiles, which is a contract company. So what was interesting for me, it was also based on a project, which I'll end with, that the problem with most contract furnishings is that the hand, what you feel, doesn't feel good, because it's made for 100,000 rubs, and it's meant to last forever, and why shouldn't it feel good under your hand? So we really worked hard. We used only U.S. mills. We discussed with him about this hand quality. We used some bamboo chenille. Some of this stuff is all plastic, recycled plastic, and created a whole collection. So from our sketch to the item, rock ledge. Mountain tartan. And a series of other ones. And so we were working at the time with the Greenbrier, which is this beautiful hotel in Western Virginia, coal mining area, and they were developing the ridge of their facility. They have 7,500 acres there, and they wanted to do an entirely green community. So these are somewhat historical houses in that area, but they're all green. Unfortunately, we can't do solar there because the canopy was too high, but everything else is all reclaimed material for the house, and so this eco collection was perfect for that, in that these were second or third homes, and so you had to think about durability more in a commercial sense than you would in a residential setting. We just finished this project in Costa Rica, which was super fun. We found all these great vendors down there to make things for us, some very unconventionally. Most people who do millwork in the United States will build a millwork in a shop and put all the veneer pressing in the shop itself, and they were doing it all on the site down there. This was a new construction, ground up, so I started the project when there was nothing there with the client, and then walked up there to show her what her living room was going to be like with this curving ceiling. You see an image from this corner later with curving ceilings. In a very kind of organic plan, in a tight kind of boxy, deep plan. And so let me just talk about that for a second because it relates to the images. So you have an elevator here, but you have to kind of get to the main room down here. So we devised a way to kind of have an entrance hall which led on to some bedrooms on one side and a powder room, but then a curving hallway that brought you obliquely down into this large kind of salon room. This is where the 25-foot high ceilings are, and had a floating oval dining room. So this woman is amazing. I wish she was my mother or a second mother, and I continue to stay in touch with her. She just loved everything that we wanted to do. I wouldn't say that money wasn't an object, but the idea of creation for creation's sake and creating beauty was what was important to her. And of course, you love to have a client like that. I wish you all the best of luck in finding those in your life. There's few and far between. So we did a number of kind of sketches in the beginning to show volumes of rooms, and you can see the curving ceiling there, and the idea of having an oval living room, oval dining room. She was very formal, she's got a bell in there, and it's a white glove service, but you have to be able to bring light into this room as well, so we had a lot of openings and cavities into it. So I'll show you a couple of the items that we created for the project. Again, this sense of organic quality and from the earth, and there's so many great elements in Costa Rica. If any of you have been there, it's a very eco-conscious country. They're into all kinds of conservation, highest literacy rate in the entire world. So everyone's very well educated and understands, what the future is bringing, and so they're eco-conscious to the extent they can with their economy. We found a wonderful woman at this company called Architects. She makes a lot of custom furnishings for very high-end hotels, and I had this idea of doing a chandelier of just kind of leaves that were floating. So we did original sketches, and then she set about making these things in her shop. And that's when it got installed. Some other elements, some made in New York City and shipped down, and some made locally there. This is kind of a set where we had very typically you'd have kind of a straight sofa and a straight console behind. We had one that was actually curving to fit the room, and the table's also curving to fit in behind it. So I was on the 10th floor of this building, and I said, well, we've got this curving wall. There's your dining room on the left with two openings. Hard wall to put art onto. It's kind of like the reverse of the Guggenheim. And so I said, well, what does it feel like to be up here? She's got 360-degree views of entire San Jose and the mountains and looking down the valley. I said, well, every time I was up there, I felt like I was a bird. So we created these bird sculptures that were going to fly out of the dining room wall across the living room and out the window. So from the same woman, we created the very simple, just bent metal pieces, and we had a light at the bottom. And they really set off the kind of sculptural quality of the room. They take the scale down of the very high ceilings and all these objects and bring it down to something that's very palatable and human and ethereal at the same time. Some lounge club chairs. There's my friend Louisa, who helped make all these furniture. And stitching details, she'd make all these different samples at different scales for me. So it's very unique to have, usually you're giving a spec to somebody and they're gonna just develop it for you and hope for the best. Here's somebody who is really interactive in the process and understands scale, proportion, design, materiality to help you really realize your dreams. So that was that room before. That's the room after. The breakfast nook is kind of a fun story of a few pieces here. The banquette was one. We made this in New York. And of course, it's always terrifying when you have a project outside the country and you've got a wall that you're measuring to there, and then you've got a fabricator in New York that's going to make something that they're going to ship down. They can't change. It's going to take 40 days to get down there. They're going to bring it up to the site, and you hope it fits. We had one that didn't in this project. We're still suffering. So I spent a lot of time in this metal shop. He made a number of pieces of furniture, including this metal panel wall that we had this idea about, almost like a extrapolated kind of bark or a wall of some kind. It was a natural tree that had been turned into metal on the site. And so I was out there and he said, well, give me a design. I said, I'm just going to sketch it for you right here. So we were out there and on a rainy morning and with my beard and crazy hair, and we sketched this thing out. And then he went about cutting it. The next process is he stained it and started putting this patina on it, which was very sculptural all the way along to the top. That was after a good day's work. Me and Gilbert. There's the panel at site, there's a panel installed, and there's the simple breakfast nook, the original sketch. So that's with the banquette and the metal panel wall. A little bit hard to see it in context because there were some other surfaces and some metal portals in the apartment, so this was a natural way. This was the ending of the dining room wall into the breakfast nook. So we had a way there to attach the floor to the ceiling. So inside the dining room, and I don't have an image of it, but we work with, and Kim, my friend here, knows this great artisan I've been working with for about 25 years also. He's a Brazilian, crazy Brazilian guy, but he does the most incredible Venetian plaster finishes. And so every project we're creating new finishes. I'm not a real fan, or have not been historically, of wallpaper. I'm getting acclimated. But I prefer this finish because of the reflective quality and the shimmer that it usually brings to rooms. So the entire interior is this Venetian plaster kind of leaf walls, and then we created a dining set in the center of the room. And the client was very specific. She wanted an armchair at a certain height, be able to slide them in and out. So that was the only thing actually in the plan that we ever changed, was we increased the size of the dining room by 3 inches all the way around in order to accommodate the table and walking space around it. So, when you're creating these things, it's always, you're dealing in the context, in particular if you're doing both architecture and interiors, but you're dealing in the context of very small dimensions to make it feel right. And if you get it wrong or it's too bulky, it just becomes a tough object to deal with in the room. So we found these huge slabs of wood. We had a seam. We had to make a seam down the middle because we actually couldn't get it in the building and didn't have the crane equipment to bring it from the outside, so we had to design it so it would come up inside the stairway, not even the elevator, because it was 13 feet long. So there's a metal base to it, but then you see in the middle photograph up here that we have a straight edge of metal but we've used the kind of natural shape of the log itself to make a metal piece to attach. And so it took six guys to be able to put it together and put it in one place, very heavy slab. Another room that was really fun, again with this kind of ribbed Venetian plaster, wood walls and metal framing, was the powder room, which we did out of slabs of onyx. Very hard to engineer because you need to actually put in a whole underlayment of fiberglass and or lucite, as we call it, as an interior panel to give it the stability. But the whole idea was to have just this entirely lit piece of stone in the room that would shimmer. Some of the other pieces that we created for this project, I didn't go into. This was the one that was unsuccessful. It was made 3 inches too short and delivered. What a problem. Just some other shots of the apartment. That was that entry hall. So we tried to use all indigenous woods for all the millwork in the place, and also here, these are lava paneled walls. So we got the largest kind of sections of lava panels that you can get, and they're farmed right out of the volcanoes locally, and did an entire room of this dark paneled wall with a kind of floating ceiling and kind of a moonstone floor. You see the powder room beyond. Some of the other views, walking down the hallway, the millwork walls, in the kind of gallery lounge. It's a movie theater. There, you can see how you can see those lights there? They're meant to be hidden by 3 more inches of sofa. I'm not afraid of pointing out my mistakes. They always happen. Master bedroom. Second bedroom, again, you can see these incredibly expansive views. There's nothing else around this building. It just looks out like it's like at the top of the world. Master bathroom. Interesting, these are all silk roses, kind of hung upside down like a bouquet, made into a fixture. Another more recent project, and actually Kim Dent worked on, and I'm not sure whether she made it here. She did. In Southampton, New York, 17,000 square foot kind of shingle style house, which we call Modern Barn. This entire structure, this is a master bedroom here and kitchen below, but beyond is the entire great room, which was 32 feet high, basically the size of a farmhouse in itself. So in construction, basically last summer, and we'll focus on a few of the rooms here. Again, we made a whole suite of custom furniture here. Kim helped me with this project as well, designing and resourcing. We worked with a number of vendors. This is one from the Hudson Valley in New York, and he made these incredible fixtures. We had some mock-ups made to see how the scale would work in the room. You know, so no matter how many times we draw something, actually you always need, at this kind of scale, to see things 3-dimensionally. And I often, if anything of this kind of scale, will make a mock-up in the space itself. So we wanted, the feeling of this was this fixture which was kind of industrial at one level, but handcrafted on another. And it had to be the right scale because there were 3 of them for this massive room. There you see them finally hung. David also made some other pieces. So we had a master balcony sitting area up above here and the dining room below. I wanted to have some kind of break front that broke up that dining room from the great room itself, so we devised these kind of floating metal dividers. So, you know, I show this because this is, you know, really part of the architecture budget, but it's really sculpture and furniture at the same time. We use this very kind of light blue, almost sea glass blue resin. The sitting area was another room that we focused on. Huge kitchen. It's actually their favorite room in the house. And then we come to April's work. April, stand up, please. This is a former graduate of Cranbrook, April Wagner, who I work with in the project, and I found kind of by chance with Kim when I was here, and I said, oh, I have this amazing idea project we want to work on. So it's a 45-foot high fixture that we put inside the turret. And so we saw samples from her and sketches, and this is what I'm talking about, the collaborative process. We had the idea, I had the drawing, I went to her shop and I saw some piece, I said I like that and that and that, and then if somebody of her kind of quality had trained at this kind of institution, has their own ideas about it, and I always go with them, because they're always right, created all these samples, and then installed the fixture last April, May. Really beautiful. Again, working with a company down in Costa Rica. There was a courtyard, and so we ended up making the table and chairs for there as well. At this point, it was still waiting for the top. You're not meant to eat through the virtual top. Some of the other furniture we created for that. We did another version of the highboy we did for the other client here. And dining room tables and all kinds of things. Some other views of this house here, so a two-story kind of entrance when you come in. There's a view of the great room looking back at the dining room, back into the kitchen. Looking the other way through the portal of the dining room. Junior master. And the study room where we did this blue lacquer ceiling, which was amazing. It was a little bit dark there, I felt, and I needed a room. This was opposite, kind of the barbell opposite of the great room, which was this huge soaring room, and I didn't want to feel like people were crunched down inside the den when they walked to the other side of the hallway. So we devised this ceiling to kind of make the ceiling disappear and create height in the room. There was a student whose name escapes me when I was here last year who was doing beautiful kind of quilt design, and we wanted to use her for the project, and I proposed her to the client, but her the craftsmanship was beautiful, no question, but the content was too sexual for the client, as I understood it. But we wanted to do this quilt headboard wall, and we ended up just doing it in a series of different fabrics. I wish I'd had the opportunity to work with another graduate here. Some other rooms, the rec room downstairs, and a little video about the project. So with that project, you saw that book that was just featured. We started the project with a 280-page design book of all the rooms and furnishings and fabric and texture and everything else. And that's how we present to every client, and we just continue to edit that book, typically in a PowerPoint presentation, to whittle it down till we get to an end book, which is the final approved kind of design. Then we go purchase based upon that. I bring that up because in the kind of world of customization that we're involved with, and also if you're going to go into interior design and design furniture, not only do you have to create many iterations for the clients, but you have to conceptualize the entire project for them in the beginning so they can understand things like a particular divider that you want to use resin sea glass on, or you want a flag chair in. It's really important to produce that whole design idea at the beginning. Another project here in New York City, and I bring this one in because so this is the before of a loft, and so architecture and interiors is also on the big scale about furniture. When we did this kitchen here, this is basically a piece of furniture. I see it as a piece of furniture insert as a kitchen. White lacquer, storage above, all kinds of lighting hidden inside its secret cabinets. It's really one piece of furniture that is a functioning kitchen. Some other rooms in this apartment, again, kind of all, you can see actually, this is my apartment in New York City, and it ends up being a junkyard for a lot of our prototypes. You can see the cloud chair sitting in the background there. And that's actually the table that was also at the Time Warner event. Powder room, a master bedroom, and you can see in the background, next slide actually. So this is my friend Ricardo, who does this amazing Venetian plaster. This is done with silver leaf and Venetian plaster. So you see this kind of harmony between the interior of the room and the stone that's in there that comes back out into the hallway, and the kind of marriage between rooms that's really important, I think. And that is it. Thank you so much.